Welcome to Eric Osmos' studio, where we have the honor of hosting General Yakovleff today. Hello.
Good, General. Hello.
Today we're going to talk about the Trump-Putin balance. What cards do the two players have in their hands today for the future of the world? A little bit of that.
I believe we will be asking ourselves these questions in the coming weeks, perhaps months, but not years. So this time we are not in the
long term.
But we're also not in the short term, day by day.
The promised ceasefire in Ukraine within a day was not achieved.
But at
90 days, 100 days, is that something? Is there a way for one of the two protagonists to put pressure to obtain a ceasefire then?
Both have means of pressure. They have reasons to meet. Because they want it. They want it. Me, I think they want it. So it's a discussion I have with my colleagues on the left, on the right, including experts on Russia. And so my opinion is not shared by everyone. So it remains, well, it's mine. And I will explain why. And then I completely hear the arguments that are opposed to me. So the reasons why I think Putin absolutely wants to meet Trump. The first one is that Putin, so there are two and maybe three. The first reason is that Putin wants to meet Trump because it's a Russia-America dialogue on an equal footing, knowing that afterwards America will impose the game of decisions on Ukraine and the Europeans. So we are in this theory of international relations that the Russians are fond of, which is the hierarchy of nations. No, nations are not equal in law, which is the foundation of our understanding of international relations. They are unequal, in fact, which is
objective reality.
But as a result, the fact makes the law for the Russians. So for Putin, it's because Ukraine is less graded than Russia, that Ukraine should have naturally accepted the order that Putin wanted to impose on it. So by making it very clear, by making very clear decisions on, among other things, the fate of Ukraine, in a bilateral dialogue between two, what Putin considers equals, Russia and the United States, he is not displaying superiority, but the truth or reality of his concept of international relations.
The return to superpower status?
For Russia, superpower like before. And so we will arrange the world order, two or three of us with the Chinese, in this particular case, in the background, not necessarily on other stages. And then it's the beginning of a new world order, actually, the result of a Russo-American condominium. So I think Putin absolutely wants this meeting as an equal and in majesty. I don't know where this will happen, but we're going to do it at
a grand scale. It would only benefit Russia to start with this first argument.
I think so. The second reason why I think Putin absolutely wants to meet with Trump is because Putin is convinced that he's going to completely fool him. I'm being polite here. There's worse. Putin is convinced that he's going to play Trump. He's going to flip him 3 times. He's going to butter him. He's going to put him in the pan. He's certain of it. So the earlier it occurs, the smoother it will go. In addition to this, we must take advantage of the fact that Trump has just arrived and he is in a power crisis. So now is the time to take advantage.
While Trump now seems less inclined to yield to the Russians than he was a few months ago, we had reason to fear.
So we
will return to it.
And the third reason, which I don't know if it is in fact a reason for Putin, is that I am convinced that Russia is not doing well, that it is doing much worse. I'm referring to the economic situation in Russia, not the essentially stabilized front where Russian pressure persists. I think Russia is near collapse in the medical sense of the word, and that it would happen in 2025. Now, this is relatively short term, so he is better off cashing in his winnings while he is still scary, rather than trying to negotiate the day when it's complete chaos in Russia. After an economic crisis like '91, that's it. And then there I say I don't know if it's a reason, because I don't know if Putin subscribes to this hypothesis. Certainly not, and maybe he is informed, maybe he knows it actually. Well, so I don't know, one, if he is aware of the fact, and I don't know if he draws his conclusions from the fact. You see what I'm trying to say? If he is completely ignorant of all the articles I read here and there about objective economic data, etc. If he is completely ignorant of all that, kept in the dark by his choice of news, his cognitive tunnel, well, that's not an argument to meet with Trump. Now, there's the other possibility. It's a bit like the Germans in October 1918. They know that the collapse is not far off.
But then, are you suggesting that we won't witness the military collapse of either side today?
I don't think we will see it.
A potential collapse would occur if we cease supporting Ukraine because the Russian economy can no longer continue.
Yes, militarily, if we stop supporting Ukraine, well, it's going to fall. In a few months, not in a few weeks. I don't think so. There are still ammunition stocks and more in the pipeline on its way. When there was the great American drought of November
2023,
from April 2024, the Ukrainians suffered, but they absorbed the major offensive from the Russians in the summer of 2024. Just an offensive from Kharkiv, that's it. So I don't know where their stocks are now, where their human resources are now. It's not because Trump would say, we stop tomorrow, that Ukraine would militarily collapse the day after, especially since all the
other allies of Ukraine will continue to support it?
Yes, they will keep supporting her. In fact, there's growing support for her. The European industry is starting to rise, but it's not good enough anyway. Besides that, it's a real card for Trump, which I will come back to militarily. Even if the front collapses, the Russians don't necessarily have the means to gallop all the way to Kiev or Lviv, in fact. And the front collapses, they will advance, but they don't have a lot of armored vehicles. They don't have a lot of logistics. Making the most of it, like after Stalingrad, the front would have collapsed and Zhukov advanced 600 kilometers while there. A priori, no. Economically, Ukraine is doing better. She is converting her economy, and not just in defense. She is suffering less from the energy crisis than last year because many infrastructures now have backup modes and generators, which means that it doesn't help them when they lose 6% of their electricity production, as their minister said a few months ago. But it no longer has the dramatic consequences that it had before. And this allows, for example, when they repair the network, to better optimize the repairs instead of dealing with emergencies left and right. You see, when we rush to the most urgent, it's not necessarily the optimal mode of network repair. Now they are able to do a little better. On the other hand, the Russian economy, it risks collapse. And when there is stock market, banking panic, when everyone rushes to the bank to retrieve bills and the banks stop distributing bills, etc. So it's this kind of mass movement, in fact, which I believe for me will be the mechanism that will bring down the regime. So if Putin, I don't know if he's aware of it, and if he's aware, I don't know if he accepts it.
But in any case, it gives him at least 2 good reasons to try to meet with Trump. So they are face to face. We are aware, Putin is aware, Trump is aware that Russia is not in a position to win definitively. At the current pace, it will still take them 3 years to take Donbass, to reach Transnistria, annex Moldova. We very well know that it's utopian with the current state of forces. What can Putin claim to get additional concessions than to sit on his gains?
Simply put, make a claim. No, it's making Trump crack. It's completely screwing him over through negotiation. So, if the negotiation was conducted rationally, then I'm going to describe a negotiation done by professionals in each camp.
We will recall that you are giving lessons on how to end a war.
Yes, yes. So when we see, so for any negotiation, not just to end a war, well, each side reflects on what are the terms to ceasefire or peace. It's not the same thing. What terms would he accept or reject? To find out, we perform wargaming. We make an assumption and see what it yields. If a counter-proposition exists for a given proposition, it creates an opening that we must shut down immediately. we find something else. And so we can, there you go. So we study a lot of possibilities, variants, etc. We count the cartridges, we prepare some of them, for example, the ammunition. There you go. And so we have a bargaining position that allows us to discuss. Afterwards, in the second phase, the Sherpas meet, the little staff of specialists meet. Sometimes it's official, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's through channels, secret services, sometimes it's a conference. Low-level conference, but the people who are there have mandates, and so the guys look for the little staff in two groups, sometimes with facilitators, but there between Russia and Turkey, the Emirates, and India are unlikely to accept arbitration based on the speaker's perspective. Argentina and Chile, they accepted the Pope for the Beagle Channel.
You see...
But there, the two who claim to be at the top of the world. Yes, they don't take advice. It's not who, the referee. They're not going to address Iceland. Well. So there's this discussion. We arrive at a text like a miracle. Well, the big ones can meet in majesty and with a few variations sign the text. And we have the agreement. Second possibility, we're not far off, but there are 2 or 3 hard sticking points which are beyond my level. And so the big bosses need to meet to finalize the agreement. And that's a professional negotiation where Trump would come in for Act 3, Scene 3, as Shakespeare would say, the moment, the apex of the play, to and appropriately prepared, etc. The problem with Trump is that so far, when he was president before, but also in his business dealings and since, he has never been like that. He considers himself to be instinctive, and on top of that, he has no interest in briefings longer than 3 minutes. And then basically, he has the memory of a goldfish for all subjects. That's been proven by everyone, including Trump supporters. He has a memory of a goldfish, aside from the wrongs that would have been done to him. Putin would have reasons to fear Trump if he expected a Kissinger like Trump, in fact. Prepared, all options have been covered, I am ready for anything. I have low blows, perverse arguments, I have them from all sides. So to destabilize the guy in front, I know how to do that too. I've already negotiated with the Vietnamese, etc. So perverts, I've met them. You see what I mean? Putin would be more scared and maybe wouldn't want to negotiate if he was expecting a Trump, a killer negotiator. Trump is considered and convinced that he's a killer negotiator, but I think against a guy like Putin, no, so Trump will no doubt play it by instinct, saying all the little stuff. Anyway, they're idiots. There's only me who can sort this out, and then Putin, I know, we get along there.
Is one who...
There you go. There's one who thinks he's all-powerful and the other one who wants to be all-powerful. So they've got everything to get along with each other. And so here we go. And I'm going to get an agreement like that. Except he doesn't even know when he walks into the room what agreement. But
here we go. What do they want? What is the final state?
Sort by...
Trump?
Well, I think that, one, I don't know. And I think that Trump doesn't know it himself.
Is it, at that time, if...
we forget...
completely the European will...
or even Ukraine, which...
is still the first...
Yes, it still exists. Yes, yes.
To stop on the front line today, to get a ceasefire on the current front line, the situation is unfavorable for Russia, acceptable for Ukraine, and desired by the United States.
So to stop the war in terms of hostilities, for people to stop dying, I think everyone would want that to happen. Even Putin, I think. Unless he lacks a conscience about his country's fate, even without taking all of the Donbass, of which he has already taken some. So in any negotiation, since we already know that we won't be in a win-win situation, we should avoid there being a loser and a winner, because the winner can only be Russia. We already know who is the loser, the first loser. So Trump should tell himself this negotiation should have 2 losers. If there are 2 losers at that moment, it means we would have a good deal, a really good deal, in the sense for history, for everyone. We already know that the Ukrainians will lose part of their territory. Right, their loss should only be a part of their territory. And so but that they gain a guarantee that it will not happen again. I will come back later on Trump's cards. But what could a balanced, honest ceasefire look like? Basically, the line would be roughly where it is, I suppose. Otherwise, we'll continue the war just to win 2 villages. So essentially, it stops at the line somewhere. I think the Ukrainians, if it were them, would be looking to negotiate what they still have in Russia in exchange for the Zaporizhia power plant. So we exchange 400 and some square kilometers for, I don't know, 10, 12 square kilometers, and we get the power plant and the energy back, and we get it up and running again. It will likely take 2 years, but in short, because that's an integral part of economic rebuilding. And then there's a second point that no one mentions, and that's why I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about it, is that Putin always says, this negotiation must be based on the realities of the battlefield. Well, there's a reality of the battlefield, which is that he lost the Black Sea battle. He lost it. On that one, the Ukrainians won. The Russian fleet, it is in Novorossiysk and in Oceanshire, in Abkhazia, where they are building a base. It's no longer in Sebastopol, in occupied Georgia, So there, if we say, okay, we take into account the realities. So in the ceasefire agreement, there must be a demilitarization of Crimea. That is, the Russian fleet does not return to Sevastopol. That's the consequence of you lost the Battle of the Black Sea. You want to negotiate based on realities. The reality is that your ships are not in Sevastopol. So at the end of the ceasefire, your ships do not return there, in order not to pose a threat. Pressure on Odessa. By the way, for Ukrainians, losing Crimea is a profound humiliation. Not being able to send his grey ships back to Putin, even though he would have won the war, is also a form of humiliation. I'm not sure he will accept it, or accept it wholeheartedly, that's clear. But it would allow us to say we have an agreement. We have a reasonable territorial agreement, and we must ensure it doesn't restart. So here, that's where a Western guarantee force is needed. I will return. How many Westerners are in Ukraine? That personally, I estimate to 20,000, 25,000 men. That's enough. A task force that is not on the front, which is well behind the front, and would be intended to counterattack a Russian offensive if the Russians decide to put the package back in 6 months or in 6 years or in 60 years like the Americans have in Korea. So it's not a peacekeeping force. The interposition force, like the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, is spread over 1,000 kilometers between the two parties, and it counts the shells. No, that's not it at all. The demilitarized zone in Korea, it's occupied, it's held by the North and South Korean armies, not by the Americans. So it's not a peacekeeping force, it's what I call a guarantee force, for lack of a better term. And what comes with ground force, regardless of anything else, the command, logistics, etc., is practically a no-fly zone. Because we would never accept having 25,000 men in Ukraine without controlling the airspace. So that means NATO or NATO nations would take control of Ukrainian airspace. Of course, this is what Putin said, red line, he will never accept anything of the sort. Yes, no, but wait, either you want a ceasefire or you don't want a ceasefire. If you want a ceasefire, you're going to have to give points. Some are minors, that's not the right word. But Zaporizhia and Crimea, in the terms I spoke of, these are not minor points. The third point is the guarantee strength, because on that day, Putin knows that launching an assault on Ukraine will be impossible. So the question of whether Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, in short, we totally don't care, since we're here for protecting it. So Trump talked about this force. He said it would take a Western force. So he, in a certain way, might have prepared the terrain. And oddly enough, by saying, and there won't be the Americans, so that seems surprising to me, because it completely puts the European Union back in play. The English are very close to the EU, there are no problems. For me, it's not of counter-defense indeed. On the contrary, it's a way of saying, I love you, we collaborate, etc. And so this would create a European command. So Trump is going to declare the strategic autonomy of
Europe unilaterally.
In the sense, this idea pursued by the French for 50 years, it will be that the Germans refused, the Danes, the Dutch did not want to hear about it. It will be imposed on them by Trump.
So we would have an equally European...
On the Americans, we would have as much European, because we will need generals, an English or French general, a German delegate, a French chief of staff, Italians, Spaniards, you see what I mean, all this, armored, Polish. So the Poles, they say they wouldn't go. So it's another, but it's less serious because they already have their own front. That's already good enough. It's normal. As a result, we will need a political military articulation like the Council of
the North Atlantic.
So we could consider a force, if the Americans don't want it, a European force. This implies a political military structure based on the Council for Policy and Security, the Council for Policy and Security of the European Union. With the inclusion of the English to make the political directives for a military organization and therefore a military staff of the European Union, etc.
But that's a just peace, but it's a peace that...
Forbids. It's not a peace, it's a ceasefire.
But in any case, that prevents Putin from hoping to be able to take over Ukraine later?
That explicitly closes the door to a third act.
Which is normal and legitimate, but would Putin be ready to accept
that? So I think that Putin, if we ask him, of course, he has no intention of accepting. Indeed, Putin is convinced that by putting pressure on Trump,
he will get
everything he wants and that Ukraine will get nothing of what it desires because Trump will have sold out Ukraine in reality. That's why Putin cites these red lines. It's not about that. It's an absolute red line and all. Why? Because when you cite red lines and nevertheless you are invited to a meeting, you proceed from the assumption that the other has already accepted your red lines. Do you see what I mean? If a woman says she'd never marry this jerk and the jerk invites her to a candlelight dinner, the invitation will lead nowhere. The girl will not come. So here, it clearly seems like Putin is going on the assumption that if or when there will be a two-way negotiation, he has already won on his points. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been invited to negotiate. So this is where Trump, if he's good, which I hope, can completely surprise him. In the sense that we both meet up and he's like, well, I've heard your red lines, here's the deal I propose. And then the other one would say, but my red lines and all, are you sure you have the means to actually say no?
So we come to Trump's cards?
Yes, so here it is. The Trump cards, there are two of them that don't depend on him, and there's one that is him. The two that don't depend on him are a result of American policy so far, which I've heavily criticized.
It was...
too calibrated. She didn't help Ukraine to win, but in the end, the result is that Ukraine is still there, still alive and always fighting, and it could continue. So the real card, this first card, is to tell Putin, anyway, as long as there is no agreement, I will continue to provide ammunition, I will continue to support Ukraine.
He might even increase support for Ukraine in case of refusal.
He stated that Russia refuses to agree to a ceasefire. And Mario Cuomo said, then we'll flood them with ammunition. I'm not sure he has it, but then there's a bit of this starting posture that is, if he doesn't want to discuss, then he's going to get it in the neck. Well, that's that. His first card. The second card is Putin's need to see him. Finally, if you agree with my thesis, Putin needs to see him and wants to see him additionally. So Trump, so he wants a deal, and so we need to find a deal, and not necessarily the one Putin wants. And then the third card could be Trump, because if Trump behaves professionally, for the first time in his life, in interstate strategy, he can completely destabilize Putin. He is the one who can turn Trump around if Trump has planned everything, memorized all the arguments, listened to his advisors, and read the little papers passed to him. In that case, Putin by surprise in his own trap and to the limit. Trump puts his ego aside and negotiates hard a la Kissinger, if I may say so. Or à la Talleyrand, we have great examples of skilled negotiators. Well, Trump might be the only one who could get Putin out of his own strategic denial, because it's a real argument, while preserving to some extent the interests of Ukraine and incidentally of the European Union.
You have a high opinion of Trump, much higher than many other people.
Who do not lend him this ability. No, it's not that I believe in miracles, but I continue to pray, that's it. So actually, I think Trump will get completely conned, that's it. But because it's in his nature, he is like that, and facing Putin, who is a real professional, a real manipulator and everything, we are going to perceive the emptiness and vanity of Trump as a negotiator. But if he wants to, if he prepares, and to the limit, if he maintains a total disinformation about the usual Trump going to meet Putin, and Putin goes there thinking, I don't know where in Geneva, etc. Thailand? I'm going to do it. And who falls? Once the door is closed, that the journalists have left, they discover the real face of Trump, and that the real face of Trump is the one I hope for. I'm unsure if I believe in miracles, but if we don't pray, there will certainly be no miracle.
Regardless, the war must end by 2025, as Russia is especially unable to economically sustain its military campaign. Both armies are exhausted, but Russia also faces a bleak economic future.
Which is?
More constrained. So ceasefire to
2025?
For you?
That's my hypothesis for 2025. So either I'm right in 2025 and we'll see each other often, or on December 31st, 2025, I end up looking like a fool. But in our previous exchanges,
you had predicted, announced, that given the competing armies we see in Russia, between the private ones, the Wagners, etc., there would be movements between these armies. In any case, up to now, you have been correct?
Yes. So it's in the mechanisms of dissolution, implosion of Russia that I do not wish for, that I do not call for. But it's a real risk. Putin is playing, he played in the sense of a player. He gambled the future of Russia as a nation with this Ukraine sketch. Or what I call Ukrainium, it's a poison that is eating away at his country. And so, as I've said several times before, the recipe is in place for a civil war, in fact. From the moment the central authority, Putin, jumps or is destabilized for one reason or another, at that point, everyone is going to jump at each other's throats. There are 27 armies in Russia at the moment, 3 ministries which have an army. There are militias, Kadyrov, Wagner, which still exist, patriots of Shogu. There are regional governors who have
militias.
There are a lot of regions in Russia that objectively hate Moscow and St. Petersburg.
And not just the Chechens?
And not just the Chechens. There are the Kabars, the Zingush, etc. As Goya excellently says, they have a loss rate 50 times higher than ethnic groups. What the Russians consider as the swarthy ones who despise, they pay 50 times the price of the blood of the good little whites of Moscow and St. Petersburg. It will be paid for sooner or later. And so the Russian economic model is collapsing, whatever they say. They circumvent the sanctions, yes, but at what cost? They've stopped investing. There are cities in Russia where the heating doesn't work. And this isn't because of Ukrainian bombings, it's simply because they no longer have spare parts for their boilers. So guys, they're freezing to death in Russia today. That's incompetence.
It's
the opposite of 2022 propaganda. Yes, the
railway.
The Trans-Siberian, the average speed is 25 miles per hour on the Trans-Siberian, so poor is the state of the tracks. 25 miles per hour on the Trans-Siberian. So it's going bad. I think things are going very bad for Russia, much worse than Putin realizes, and if he realizes it's time for him to negotiate.
The analysis said it was the second half of 2025 that both elements, Russia would no longer have the stocks coming out of its army to continue providing tanks, and the economy, indeed, second half of 2025. So, elements could be aligned in all cases.
And then there may be completely accidental factors, the black swans, as they say, the black sign.
Cigarettes in refineries, for example.
So
he can
a successful Ukrainian attack? I'm not certain. What will be the mechanism as such beyond a collapse of a company with a cascade effect leading to a banking collapse? There, when the whole country can no longer withdraw money from the bank, no matter what they say about the regime. Yes, a crisis.
Style 91.
Him too, his policeman. There you go, a crisis style 91.
So the urgency to negotiate is also from the great Russian before it could
happen.
I believe it. Well, General, a big thank you. Thank you to you. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon at the Eric Osmos studio.
Subtitle 501.